Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we had started a Rashi yesterday, and I'm going to see, maybe I'm going to share two. Uh, let's see if I can do this. Yes, okay. Okay. So this is the Rashi we started on this, and as you can see, I went over it and translated it, and also tried to provide the references that Rashi makes here. So let me see if I can do this. Hopefully, I can show you this. Let's see here. No, let's see what I can do. I'm going to move this down here, right, and see if I can find it. For some reason, oh gosh, let's see. Oh, okay, I see why. All right. Here we go. So I'm assuming you can see this other page now that I have open, and I'm going to put this here. All right. So Rashi, as we saw, we started it right here, that this one sentence, right, that here, where it says, Valeilch Esav el Yishmael, that Esau went to Yishmael, Vayikach et Machalat bat Yishmael, and that he took Machalat, daughter of Yishmael. And the fact that he, going on, Ben Avraham, right? Ishmael, son of Abraham, Achot Nevayot. The fact that it mentions here that she was the sister, that Machalat was the sister of Nevayot, is something that creates a major chronology and an ability to discuss something that has a very interesting conclusion. Because the fact that the Torah mentions that Machalat was the sister of Nevayot seems irrelevant, because we could have deduced that anyway from other genealogies that are given elsewhere, which mentions that Machalat was the sister of Nevayot. So why is it mentioned here? Well, just to summarize how far we got the last time, is the fact that Yishmael died at this, sorry, let me make sure I got the right thing. Yes, Yishmael died at this time after Machalat was designated to Yishmael. And so the reason why the Torah is mentioning that she was sister of Nevayot is that Nevayot was the one who actually performed the actual marriage ceremony. In other words, she was betrothed but she was betrothed by Yishmael, and she was married to Esau. She was betrothed by Ishmael to Esau, and then she was married to Esau by Nevayot. Okay. So now let's see and so the Rashi concludes that we have a tradition that both Yishmael, let's make sure we have this correctly, right? Lamadnu shemet Yishmael misha yada le'esav. So this is where it mentions that Yishmael died when he had been betrothed Machalat to Esau, okay? Vehisia Nevayot, and there we see that Nevayot was the one who actually performed the marriage, okay? And we have learned Shaya Yaakov Ba'oto Perek Ben Samach Gimel Shanim, right? So we understand that at this particular point, Jacob, when Esau married Machalat, he would have been 63 years old. Shahare Yishmael, and here we go. Yishmael ben Ayin Daled Shanim Haya, and we go back a previous generation to Yishmael. The Yishmael was 74 years old, Keshnolad Yaakov, when Jacob was born. And he goes, because 14 years, Sheyudalet Shana Haya Gadol Yishmael meYitzchak, because we read how Yishmael was 14 years older than Isaac. The Yitzchak ben Samach Shana beledet otam. And we read, these are all verses in the Torah, that Isaac was 60 years old when Esau and Jacob were born, right? So So here we go. Let me just get this out of the way here. So 60 plus 14 is 74. Ayin Dalet, 74. Ushnotav hayu kuf lamed zayin, and we know elsewhere that he was 137 when he died, right? Because it says Shinemar ve'ele shnei chayei Yishmael, because it says this was the life, this was how long Ishmael died, etc. And it mentions specifically that he was, excuse me, having a hard time here, 137 years old. Okay, let's take a look here. Right. So if he was 137, he would have been 137 when Esau married Machalat, and it was at the same time we read in the context of our narrative that when Esau saw how Jacob had been sent away so as not to marry Canaanite women, etc., he married Machalat. So we know that Esau was at that point he would have been, excuse me, let me find out the place. Okay. So we know how old Esau was at the time, and because we know that Ishmael died at that time. So Nimtza, so we find that Yaakov Keshemet Ishmael, that when Ishmael died, he would have been 63 years. Haya. Right, so let me just go back here. Hopefully let me make sure. I'm doing this in order, let's see, right. I want to make sure I've got the place when I go back here. Here I have it in English, okay? Jacob was 63 years old when he left his father's house. How do we know this? So Yishmael was 74 when Jacob was born. How do we know this? He was 14 years older than Isaac. Abraham was, and explaining how he was 14 years older than Isaac. Rashi didn't do that here, but I'm putting it in. Abraham was 90 when Ishmael was born. Why? Because we know Abraham was 99, Genesis 17:1, when he was told of Isaac's coming birth a year later. And he, Ishmael, and the males of his household were circumcised on that day when Abraham was given that announcement a year before the birth of Isaac. And it mentions that Ishmael was 13 years old at the time. It says it specifically in Genesis 17:25. We know that Isaac was 40 when he married Rivka. That is in Genesis 25:20. Esau,
Rabbi,
yes, yes,
we know that Isaac was 40 when he married Rivka,
correct.
but according to the similar type of calculations, Rivka was 3,
Right, I know.
and I take that as not likely to be the case.
Yes,
But yet, if we're going by the same calculations as all these calculations that you're doing right now,
yes,
if you're saying that those are valid, then we have to say that Rivka being 3, and then when she met
Isaac,
Isaac,
yes.
yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I don't want to go too much into your legitimate question. I will tell you that when I was studying this, there is a Tosafot, I don't know if it's Tosafot Yeshanim, that questions that on the basis of your point that you make, and they come up with a different calculation which doesn't have Rebecca at 3 years old. Okay, it is making some assumptions about how old Isaac was when the Akedah took place. That's why. So let's stay with this particular calculation, which doesn't force us to believe that Rebecca was 3 years old. Okay, you'll have to take my word for it because I will have to find that particular commentary that I found that questioned that particular chronology. But this chronology is good as we're going, and and look at how much we have to go. So I want to make sure I can cover this in the time that we have. Okay.
Okay.
So we know these are all based on verses, right? They're actual verses. That's why it was very important for me to find the actual references where it says in the Torah these things. Isaac was 40 when he married Rivka. That's Genesis 25:20. Esau and Jacob were born when Isaac was 60. That's in chapter 25, 26. It says that. So Ishmael would have been 74 at the time because we've established that he was 14 years older than Isaac. Okay, we know this. So Ishmael would have been 74 when Esau and Jacob were born. If Ishmael died at 137, that's in chapter 25, 17, then Jacob would have been 63 years old. That's how we came up with that calculation, right? 137, right? Minus 74. That gives us 63 years old when he left home. So we have this tradition, and this is something that is not explicitly mentioned in the Torah. This is part of oral tradition, but it is based, as you will see, on the calculations here. That is to say that when he left Isaac and Rebekah and headed for Charan, he studied in the school of Aver for 14 years before going to Charan. That is a tradition that's based on these particular calculations, and we'll see. How do we get this 14? So there's this 14-year lacuna, that is not accounted for in the verses of the Torah. And the tradition is that he went to the school of Aver, he went to yeshiva for 14 years to study Torah. Again, we need to understand this more in a literary kind of way than a historical kind of way. All right. But that he went there and he needed to be able to get some background. And the issue is, what is it telling us? What is it trying to inform us? And what it will be telling us ultimately, and what this is all going to lead to, is how incredibly powerful the study of Torah is. And the reason it has to do that is because you know that human nature is such that we tend to ignore the Torah and we tend to not think of it as something that important. Okay, so here we go. Here's how we get it. So now going from a different point, a different perspective, right? But we require all these numbers that we have achieved, right? That he was 63 years when he left Isaac and Rebekah. So he remained with Lavan for 14 years till Joseph was born, right? He worked 7 years for Rachel, and then that turned out to be Leah, so he had to work another 7 years, and that made a total of 14. And we mentioned Joseph was born, again, Genesis chapter 31, 41. Again, working on this calculation. Joseph was 30 years old when he reigned in Egypt. That is, so now we know, right? So 30 years had passed from that time. So we have that chapter 41, 46 mentions that Joseph was 30 years old when he reigned in Egypt. Another 9 years passed till Jacob went down to Egypt. That is in chapter 45, verse 11, where Joseph says to his brothers, there are still 5 years left of famine. And we know there were 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. So since there were 5 years of famine left, subtract from 7, 7 plus 2, 9. So when Jacob arrived, so 9 years passed till Jacob went down to Egypt. We know when Jacob arrived, he appears before Pharaoh and tells him, I'm 130 years old, explicitly, chapter 47, verse 9. So we have, right? Joseph, let's make sure we've got this, right? There's 14 plus 30 plus 9, right? This is Jacob, right? 14 years working for Lavan. Joseph is born and he's 30 years in Egypt. So 14 plus 30, and there's another 9 years with the years of plenty and famine. That gets a total of 53. 130 minus 53 is 77. If Jacob was 63 when he left home, plus 14 till the birth of Joseph, plus the 9 years, plus the 30 years, that totals 63 plus 53. But he said to Pharaoh, I'm 130 years old. So now we have accounted for 116 years of Jacob's life. We're left with 130 minus 116, which is 14 years. That's the 14 years we have to deal with. So that's a major point. Now, in the Rashi itself, it goes on to say that in an ancient version or an earlier manuscript in Rashi, there is the following point being made. That is, Jacob wasn't punished for leaving his father for those 14 years. So even though, of course, he went at the command of his father, that's an interesting sort of thing. Are we saying that had Jacob not done some of the things he did, regardless, the fact that he did those things and we realized that they were ambiguous, right? In other words, on some levels, they were the right thing to do, and on some levels, they weren't the right thing to do. And clearly, I mean, we see that. Sorry, is somebody making a point? Okay. So here's the thing. On a strict justice level, he has to account for the bad stuff he did, which may be why the Torah places it the way it does and doesn't make Jacob to be a purely righteous person. So he has to pay for what he did, even though ultimately what he did was the right thing. The fact that he used bad methods to achieve what was right still means he had to pay for it. And because he did those things, that was the reason why he had to leave his parents. And so he was gone from his father, and he was not fulfilling the commandment to honor his father and his mother. All right. So the period while he was gone, he was not honoring his father and his mother. It's true that on the one hand, he left because they told him, but on the other hand, the reason he had to leave them on one level was because of how he had cheated Esau, and Esau would kill him. All right. So, and if he had just been going in order to get a wife, it didn't necessarily need to take that period of time. Okay. So here we go. Here we are. So how do we say that he wasn't punished for leaving his father for those 14 years? Joseph was away from his father for 22 years total. That is, that after he was sold by his brothers, right, Jacob himself had to pay to have his son away from him for that period of time. In other words, this is going into a very strict justice, saying that Jacob was paid back for having left his father for 22 years. It would have actually been a total of 36 years, okay, because he was actually gone 30. Let's see, make sure that we have this, all right, as a punishment for Jacob's being gone from his father, right? 30 before, so, sorry, okay, let's see how this works out. All right, Joseph was 30 when he came before Pharaoh, minus 17 his age when he was sold by his brother, right? That's in this particular chapter, equals 13 years, plus 9 years of the good and lean years, which makes 22. So he was gone from his father for 22 years. Now Jacob was with Lavan for 20 years, plus the 2 years he took to return to his father's house. And here, this is a little bit of a jump here and involves tradition, because it says that he built a house on his way back in chapter 33, Genesis 33:17. It says in the verse that he built a house and booths. This is all taken from Rashi here. Our sages say that he tarried 18 months, 6 winter months in his house. That is in other words, 18 months totally, 6 winter months in his house, quote, because you have to be in your house, because in wintertime in the Mediterranean climate, it rains. You can't be doing field work. And 2 summer months in booths, because the real reason for booths is to protect you from the sun for his flocks. So he was another approximate 8, 6, and 8, 18, a total of 18, total of 18, coming back. So 2 years approximately. So we can conclude that Jacob wasn't punished for those 14 years of studying Torah because of the merit of the Torah. The merit of Torah study was so great that it was a legitimate justification for his being away. So he was actually away. So Jacob was away let me see. So Jacob was away from Isaac the 14 years, right? He was actually 20 years with Laban, right? So he was away from his father for 22 years, plus the 14 years he spent with in the at the Academy of Aver, but he was only punished, quote, quote, for the 22 years that he was away with Lavan and those 2 extra years coming back. So let me just see if I can correct that. All right. So that is all this here. That's what I've just summarized here. And I'm going to stop the share here for just for a moment and see if there are any questions. All right. Were you able to pretty much follow that particular chronology? Morris, do you still have questions?
Well, if we're going to discuss Rivka or not,
Yeah, I would have to go and look at that.
yeah, we can do it another time. I've read somewhere else where they estimate it was 12 to 20, but there's no explanation how they came to it.
So the issue has to do with how old was Isaac at the Akedah.
Well, they
Okay.
say 37.
Okay. So and the issue is and it says there at the end of the Akedah how he heard that Rivka was born.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So and it also says
yeah,
essentially that Isaac married, they went to get Rivka after Sarah died. Okay. So Sarah died, she was 127. 127. So that's sort of how I don't have all those figures in front of me
yeah, but
now.
she got pregnant when she was 90.
Correct. Or she gave birth
No,
when she was 90.
she gave birth when she was 90.
Correct, to
So
Isaac.
she died at 127.
Right.
So
And they say that, so if you accept the Midrash that says that Sarah died when she heard about the Akedah, right? That's how you would get Isaac being 37 years old,
yeah.
right? 127 minus 90 gives you 37. And that's how you would figure that Isaac was that old. But it's based on an assumption that Sarah died at the Akedah.
Well, that's the way it's supposed. That's the way it's presented.
That is, okay. But the truth is there are plenty of places in the Torah where it doesn't follow, where the flow of the narrative doesn't necessarily follow a chronological sequence. We'll read about the death of Abraham long before it actually takes place in terms of the narrative itself. Okay. We read about it in the narrative, in the course of reading the Torah. But the actual death of Abraham, according to tradition, happened after Esau and Jacob were already born. Because we say that the mention of the pottage of lentil stew was a mourner's meal for Abraham's death, that they were sitting Shiva for Abraham at that particular time.
But Isaac never talked to his father after the Akedah.
I think that is an argument from silence, Harlan. Okay, we don't read about it, but there's no reason to think that he never did. I'm not saying there may not be a midrash. I haven't come across that midrash. There are people who say it, but just the Torah isn't going to record every single conversation that Isaac and Abraham had. It's literature, so it only records that conversation that has literary value to it.
Okay.
And the Torah only wants to make points, is only going to record things that have significance. in terms of what it has to teach us now, right? Part of the reason for literature isn't simply entertainment. Good literature is far more than simply entertainment. Good literature also helps us gain a better understanding of ourselves as human beings and life. It gives us a better understanding of life. And the Torah certainly wants to do that.
I think Abraham should have told Isaac that God told him to sacrifice him. Abraham
Again,
didn't tell Isaac that. God said that.
Okay.
The test Abraham.
Actually, I think he does. If you look at the narrative, in a sense, he does. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he does imply it. And so that's part of Isaac's righteousness, is that where it says, and they journeyed together, it mentions that almost like a chorus. That first, Vayelchu shnehem yachdav, that Hebrew phrase is used more than once. And the point of that Hebrew phrase is to say that despite the fact that Isaac understood what was about to happen, he still went along with his father.
Rabbi, I understood that when it's mentioned that Isaac asked, "Where is the sacrifice?"
Right, right.
And Abraham says that God will provide the sacrifice for my son.
Correct.
So
He says that. I know. It's ambiguous. Right. It is specifically. Jocelyn, thank you for mentioning that. That's important. Right. So he does suggest it. But listen, it's such an awful, awful consideration. You can understand why he wouldn't want to say it explicitly to Isaac. But Isaac would understand it. Yes.
Did you say that Sarah was died because she knew that God was going to sacrifice her son? What was it?
Well, that her husband was. There is a midrash to that effect. There is actually a midrash. And part of that is because it mentions the death of Sarah immediately following the story of, the Akedah, of the sacrifice. It mentions that. But it doesn't say it explicitly. It never says Sarah died after she heard what Abraham did. But it is a well-known midrash. It is not this is not something that I'm saying people just came up with. It's there, okay, as a midrash, and it is based on a certain amount of logic. But it is not a compelling argument, right? Whereas what I went over with you this time was based on biblical verses explicitly. And what part of the value of what I wanted to do with you today was to see how, with this kind of knowledge, how the people who studied the Torah so carefully and loved it so much that they were able to take all these various disparate verses, and put them together and draw conclusions based on that chronology. You have to like it a lot to want to do that.
Then Abraham died peacefully.
Say that again.
Did Abraham die peacefully?
Yes, it mentions that specifically, that he died in old age and in peace and satisfied, etc. It mentions that back at the end of Chayei Sarah. It talks about that. He took care of his affairs. He sent away, I think he had 10 children with Keturah. He sent them on their way. He gave them gifts. It mentions these specifically in the Torah. Okay. And it talks about how Isaac and Ishmael came and buried Abraham. And of course, that's implied that this rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael had been peacefully concluded.
What happened to Ishmael?
Well,
Later.
we will read, in fact, about at the end of Toldot, the Parsha that we're looking at. I'm trying to think of where we would. Yeah. Nope. I guess no, it's at the end of the next Parsha. At the end of Vayetze, I believe. I think we read about Ishmael's. I have to go back and check as to what the actual reference is.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. It could have been at the end of Chaye Sarah, actually. I'd have
But
to go
God,
back and look.
yeah,
It's
God
quite
said to
possible
Ishmael,
that we wind up Ishmael's affairs. I think it would make sense that we would wind them up Ishmael's at the end of Chaye Sarah. That's the previous portion. I can double check quickly.
did Ishmael have 12 tribes?
I think he did actually.
And they were Arab.
Well, the Muslims claim descendancy from Ishmael. That's who they claim descendancy. So let me look quickly if I can. At if I may see. Okay. Sorry, let me see if I can find this. I don't have a Torah in front of me. Okay, there we go. Let's see where this is. Let's see if I actually have this. Hold on a second. Okay, there we are. Let's see here. Okay. I'm going to the end of Chaye Sarah. One second. I'm having to look it up. Okay, so chapter 25 of Genesis talks about Keturah. Okay. And what happened there. Okay. Here we go. Chapter 12 of Genesis, chapter 25. Hold on a second. I will show you. One moment. Let's see. Here we are. See what it says here. Sorry. I know I'm going to try and get it. Here it says, verse 12, chapter 25. These are the line of Ishmael. So here we read about the children of Ishmael, right? Here's Nevayot. Remember, Nevayot was mentioned, and he's the firstborn. So it would make sense that he would contract the marriage afterwards. And then we've got all these different people, right? Yeah. So here are the sons of Ishmael. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Ishmael has 12 sons. So there they are. Okay. And there it talks about their descendants and so this is what we read about Ishmael. And it is at the end of Chaye Sarah. So thank you for asking and having me look things up. I'm sorry my memory isn't a steel trap.
Did Jacob have 12 sons plus a daughter?
Correct.
A daughter? Oh, he had a daughter.
Yes, remember we have that whole story about Dinah. Yes. Interesting things. Yes. So we have now concluded all our study with Rashi on Parsha Toldot. So
I was wondering if Gusafet, the sons of Rashi, have they any say against Rashi of some sort?
You're talking about the Tosafot, Rashi's grandsons?
Yeah.
So basically in the Gemara, what they do is they will question and respectfully disagree with their grandpa.
Oh.
Okay. And look, there's a tradition that says that to actually know Talmud, something like Talmud, you have to be able to argue convincingly both ways. And it's saying something about truth. That truth isn't just narrow and one-sided. Truth is not that. And there's a wonderful drush, so I'll end this lesson with this, about the words in Hebrew for truth and falsehood. The word in Hebrew for truth is emet. Emet is spelled Aleph, Mem, Taf, the first letter of the alphabet, the middle letter of the alphabet, and the last letter of the alphabet. Why? Because in order to discover the truth, you have to do a lot of research and you have to be open. You have to be open to both sides and the middle and everything in between. you to find the truth. The word for falsehood is sheker. Shin, kuf, resh. Those three letters are right next to each other. If all you've done is look at one side and a narrow view, that for sure is going to be false. There's another element to it. The letters that form truth, Aleph, Mem, and Taf, all have the Aleph and the Taf have two legs to them, and the Mem has this flat line on it, and that's because truth endures. And the word sheker, on the other hand, has only one leg. Kuf and a resh, one leg, and a shin. If you look at how it's lifted, how it's shaped, you'll see it comes down to a narrow point and can topple over. So essentially, you can topple over truth. So yeah. So part of the reason why the Tosafot are on the same page as Rashi in commenting on the Gemara is to give us that broad perspective. Okay. So